Jerry on the phone. I have Jerry, he's on my phone, thinking that maybe he can hear this way. So Jerry, can you?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Can you all hear Jerry?
Yep.
Okay.
Terrific.
All right.
Very good. We will proceed in this manner.
Let's go.
All right. First of all, for those of us on the telephone who are Christian, I believe today is Ash Wednesday. After Fat Tuesday yesterday, I didn't celebrate yesterday. I'm not celebrating today, but it is the beginning of the of probably the most important season in the Christian calendar. I don't know what you guys have given up, but I've given up nothing. As is the tradition, to give up something. Welcome to the March DASNY board meeting. It's great to see all of you and hear others on the phone. We have lots of material to cover today, but I thought, Mr. Chairman, in honor of some of your history, I'd make a point that I thought of late last night, actually. On March the 2nd of 1962, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, Wilt Chamberlain, in a game, the Philadelphia Warriors versus the New York Knickerbockers, Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points in that game. I don't know. I think that record still stands. I don't know that, but
It does. Yes, it does.
It does, and it had to be the Knicks.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hey, it is what it is, son.
Yes, it is.
But it was. You all know that I grew up in a barbershop. My dad owned one. That was on a Thursday or a Friday, that game. That Saturday, after the game, a building that was designed to hold maybe 20 people, we had more than 50 folk there, all celebrating the extraordinary accomplishment of this very proud Black basketball player. It was a big deal in my little community. And I've remembered it ever since. It was March 2nd, which means it was 60 years ago today. What an amazing accomplishment. Anyway, forgive me, I do digress. Welcome, Sarah, if you will take a moment to read the roll.
I would be happy to do that. And Jerry has made the comment, you were about 1 year old, Mr. Chair.
well, I can tell you for definitively, neither Alex or I were born on that day.
Yeah. I knew that about Alex. I wasn't sure about you.
I was born shortly thereafter, but
okay, all right. March 2, 1962. An amazing day in history. I remembered it. Anyway. Sarah, if you will walk us through the roll.
I would be happy to. We have a bit of a full house here today. For board members for this meeting, we have our chair, Al Carney, vice chair, John Johnson, secretary, Beryl Snyder. We have Jerry Romsky joining us by phone today, John Gardner, Joan Sullivan, Janice McKinney, Adrian Swizerski, and Phyllis Morris. Board members absent today are Wellington Chen and Ken Evans, who are not able to join us. For DASNY staff members, we have our president, Ruben McDaniel, Paul Koopman, our vice president. We also have Portia Lee, Kim Ellis, Deb Fasser, Dave Ostrander, Matt Bergen, Jeffrey Gordon, Craig Shrivogel, Dina Amodio, Kathy Ebert. Get our staffers here. Ricardo Salomon, Alex Sardine, Nadine Fontaine, our general counsel, and Nancy DePaulo. For outside, we also have Steve Curro with us. For outside counsel, we have Alethea Nanku, Natalie Pearson-Farrar, Virginia Wong, Charles Hawley, Melissa Bennett, Robert Drilling, Chris Reitzel, Sonny Williams, and Seth Bryant. And that is
so it's an expensive meeting. Thank you, Nadine. Thank you very much.
And with that, Mr. Chair, I will turn it back to you.
Then we will run quickly to the minutes. The members have had a chance to review the minutes. Are there any revisions recommended, any changes? I guess it's still a transcript as opposed to minutes. So thank you. Are there any recommended revisions? Did we leave anything out? Then may I have a motion, please, to adopt the transcript?
It's Joan. I make the motion.
Thank you, Joan. Is there a second?
Janice, I second it.
Janice, thank you very much. All in favor indicate with aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, then the motion to adopt the minutes passes unanimously. Mr. Romsky, we get to the second agenda item, the Finance Committee report. Thank you for your meeting yesterday.
And again, I apologize for whatever technical reason I can't connect through Zoom. Hopefully it's not the folks over in the eastern part of Europe playing with the and I thought about
What, are you in the Ukraine now? What? Where are you?
I don't know. It's been frustrating, but I'm good. So anyways, let me just jump through. We adopted the meeting minutes from the February meeting of the Finance Board, and then we addressed two financings. First was the school district revenue bond financings. After a little bit of a discussion, we voted unanimously to recommend that that financing be approved today. And then we went on to discuss the Rockefeller University financing. After noticing what a wonderful client they are and what a fine institution that Rockefeller is, we quickly and unanimously agreed that this financing should also be adopted today. And unless anyone has any questions or concerns, that's going to conclude my report, Mr. Chair, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Are there questions for Jerry? The matters which the Finance Committee reviewed yesterday, as Jerry has just said, are recommended for approval to the board. We will go now to the adoption of documents. And Mr. President, if you'll do that resolution for us.
If I could just insert here, I'm sorry, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, I just do want to note that the Finance Committee also did the required annual review of the Finance Committee charter. And they reviewed that. There's no action required by the board, but we're obligated to review that once a year and note for the official board record that we've done so.
Sarah, thank you. And thank you for getting it into the record. It's important. Thank you. Mr. President.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Good to see everyone this morning. Behind tab 3 is the transaction summary update for the new school. Dave Ostrander of DASNY will present. We've got Alethea Nanku, Esquire of Squire Patton Boggs, and Natalia Pearson Farrar of Golden Holly James. This resolution to proceed for this transaction was adopted on February the 2nd, and that's also behind tab 3. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll keep my comments very brief. As you just mentioned, this is a transaction that the board approved last month for resolution to proceed. Since that time, there's been no change in the plan of finance or the security package that was described to the board. Also, since that time, we've received PACB approval, TEFRA hearing has been held, and the secret review has been completed. So assuming the board adopts the documents today, we do anticipate mailing the preliminary official statement for this transaction and pricing as early as next week. So unless there's any questions for me, I will turn it over to Natalia to discuss the documents.
Natalia, Alicia, welcome. It's good to have you both.
Thank you, Chairman Carney. And I just want to say good morning to all the DASNY senior staff and board members and President McDaniel. Thank you for having us here today. It's further detailed in our letter to the board provided last week. Before you for consideration is the adoption of 2 series resolutions relating to the new school. The proposed Series 2022 bonds would be issued pursuant to DASNY's new school revenue bond general resolution, which the board adopted in 2016, and one or both of the series resolutions before you today. The 2016 general resolution constitutes an agreement between DASNY and the bondholders to be issued for the bonds to be issued thereunder. The 2016 general resolution authorized the issuance of multiple series of bonds for purposes including paying cost of one or more projects, paying cost of issuance, and refunding outstanding bonds or other obligations of DASNY that were issued on behalf of the new school or other indebtedness of the new school. Each series of bonds is separately secured from other series of bonds. So we are now requesting that the board adopt 2 series resolutions under the 2016 general resolution, a series 2022A and a series 2022B. Each of the series resolutions, individually and in the aggregate, authorizes the issuance of bonds entitled to the benefit, protection, and security of the 2016 general resolution. And the bonds are authorized to be issued in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $186,925,000. The series 2022 bonds are expected to be issued for the purpose of providing funds which will be used by the new school to, number one, pay the cost of the acquisition, renovation, and equipping of a 12-story building located at 318 East 15th Street in New York, which the new school has been leasing since 2009. And this is to provide residential living space for the university students. Number two is to refund all or a portion of the authority's outstanding new school revenue bonds, Series 2011, and third, to pay cost of issuance. Now, we expect that the Series 2022 bonds will be issued as one series of tax-exempt fixed rate bonds and a second series of taxable fixed rate bonds. The bonds will be special obligations of DASNY payable solely from the revenues, which consist of certain payments to be made by the new school under a loan agreement, which Alethea will describe in more detail. DASNY will assign and transfer to the trustee, which is the Bank of New York Mellon, all of DASNY's right, title, and interest in any and all monies due or to become due to DASNY, and any and all other rights and remedies of DASNY under or arising out of the loan agreement, with certain exceptions. The Series 2022 bonds will also be secured by the assignment by DASNY to the trustee of the pledged revenues, which consist of the security interest and tuition and fees charged to students for academic instruction and other money, income, rents, or revenues of the new school, given by the new school to DASNY to secure the university's obligations under that loan agreement. Additionally, the Series 2022 resolutions delegate to any DASNY authorized officer the powers that are more particularly described in our letter to the board, including to determine the final terms of the bonds and to execute and deliver various documents. If there are no questions for me, I will turn it over to my co-counsel, Alethea, and she'll discuss the loan agreement and the other financing documents. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you, Natalia, and good morning to DASNY's board members and senior staff. Again, my name is Alethea Nanku from Squire Patton Boggs. And thank you for having both Natalia and I here with you today. As Natalia mentioned, each series of bonds issued under the 2016 general resolution is separately secured from each other series of bonds by the pledge and assignment to the applicable trustee of the applicable revenues and the funds and accounts established pursuant to the applicable series resolution. In connection with this issuance of the Series 2022 bonds, DASNY and the new school will execute a new loan agreement. The loan agreement is a special obligation of the university payable out of any monies of the university legally available to it for such payment. The Series 2022 bonds will be a special obligation of the authority. The principal and interest of the Series 2022 bonds are payable solely from the revenues, as Natalia described previously. The loan agreement is based on DASNY's new model agreement and consistent with DASNY's financing guidelines. It will contain the appropriate standard document provisions and may include additional security provisions based on market conditions when the Series 2022 bonds are priced in the market. Upon the issuance of the Series 2022 bonds, the authority will assign its rights under the loan agreement to the trustee, Bank of New York Mellon, pursuant to one or more assignment agreements, subject to certain retained rights of the authority relating to the preservation of the tax-exempt status of the bonds, validity of the bonds, indemnification of the authority by the university, and receipt of the authority of its administrative fees. Additionally, it's expected that the existing intercreditor agreement between the authority and the trustee for the previously issued bonds of the new school under the general resolution will be amended to now include the Series 2022 bonds, pursuant to which each series of bonds will be of equal priority to each other with respect to the pledge revenues. Lastly, the Series 2022 bonds are proposed to be sold in a negotiated sale to Goldman Sachs & Co. pursuant to one or more bond purchase agreements. This concludes our presentation, but we'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
Alethea, thank you. Are there questions? And forgive me, I mispronounced your name earlier. I know better. Just not thinking. Are there questions for Natalia or Alethea? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction?
I will move. This is Beryl.
Thank you, Beryl. Is there a second?
I second Janice.
Thank you very much, Janice. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Hearing no comments at all, the motion passes and passes unanimously. Let me say quickly that we're very fortunate to have a client of the caliber and quality of the new school as a client. And I'm very grateful for all the work that all of you have done to make this transaction go as smoothly as it has. Thank you all very much. And David, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman.
Mr. President, we then go to the single approval category. You've got the floor.
Thank you, sir. Behind tab 4 is the school district's revenue bond financing program. I want to highlight this is the 20th anniversary of this program. So, we've been doing it for a long time. That benefit a lot of the schools in New York State through that period of time. Proud to do it once again. We've got Dave Ostrander of DASNY presenting. We've got Melissa Bennett of Barclay Damon and Robert Drillings of Berger Gray. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. President. The board is being asked to adopt the necessary documents to authorize multiple series of bonds in an amount not to exceed $750 million to be sold through multiple negotiated offerings on behalf of various New York State school districts. Proceeds from this authorization may be used to refinance the bond anticipation notes or bands of various New York State school districts, to finance the new money projects on behalf of these districts, or to refund bonds issued by DASNY through the school district's program. As in previous years, staff is requesting authorization to meet current demand from school districts for a new money and band refinancing pool closing in June, as well as to accommodate additional demand that could occur later in the year. In addition to the new money pool, we anticipate structuring a refunding pool later this year to provide interest rate savings for districts with bonds that are callable during 2022. As we've discussed with the board in the past, school district participation in the DASNY pool is rate driven. When school districts issue bonds, they can receive building aid reimbursement from the state in one of two ways. School districts can issue their own general obligation bonds, in which case they receive building aid based on the statewide average interest rate from the previous year. Or school districts can issue through DASNY, in which case they receive building aid based on their actual cost of borrowing. And since reimbursement rates lag behind current interest rates, in a declining interest rate environment, districts tend to issue on their own, whereas in a rising interest rate environment where we see ourselves now, they tend to issue through DASNY. Over the last 5 years, our school district pools have ranged from about 300 million up to 585 million. And Mr. Chairman, yesterday at the Finance Committee, we talked a little bit about what this year's pool will look like. I did get some additional feedback from the school district FAs, and I think we'll probably be on the higher end of that range. So, based on the factors that we discussed with rising interest rates, I think we're going to see a pretty large pool this year. So,
Thank you for checking. I appreciate it.
Sure. Between that and the refunding later this year, I think we'll need all of the 750 million that we're asking for today.
Okay.
So, at this point, unless there's any questions, I will turn it over to Melissa and Robert to discuss the documents.
Thank you for joining us, Melissa and Robert. It's good to have you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. As noted, before you for consideration is the adoption of the 2022 supplemental resolution pursuant to the amended and restated master resolution in order to provide financing to school districts for school construction projects that are eligible for building aid and approved by the Commissioner of Education. The master resolution provides for the issuance from time to time of multiple series of bonds in an unlimited principal amount. Since 2004, multiple series and supplemental resolutions have been adopted. Each series issued under the master resolution are special obligations of DASNY, payable solely out of revenues, which consist generally of the payments to be made by the school districts on their bonds issued to DASNY, and the payments to be made by the state comptroller to DASNY out of state funds otherwise payable to a particular school district if that district has not made a payment on its bonds issued to DASNY. Each series of bonds issued under the master resolution is separately secured from all other series. As Dave mentioned, the 2022 supplemental resolution before you would authorize up to an additional $750 million of bonds as and when needed to satisfy the needs of the participating school districts. And it also authorizes customary rights for negotiated public offering of bonds. As in the past, while credit enhancement is not required, municipal bond insurance historically has been cost-effective for certain bonds and may be utilized for certain bonds this year. I'll now turn the presentation over to my co-counsel, Robert Drilling, to discuss the financing agreement.
Thank you,
Melissa. Mr. Chairman, board members, as with the prior series of multiple series of school district revenue bonds issued to finance or refinance projects for school districts in the state, each school district participating in this year's program will enter into a financing agreement with DASNY, subject to the approval of the State Commissioner of Education. Under the financing agreements, the school districts are obligated to make payments to DASNY in amounts sufficient to cover principal and interest on their applicable series of bonds when due, regardless of whether the school districts receive state aid payments. In addition, each school district will issue its bonds to DASNY that are backed by its full faith and credit pledge, which requires the school districts to levy taxes in amounts sufficient to enable them to pay the school district bonds that secure their respective obligations under their financing agreements. The school district's obligations to make the payments due under the financing agreements and other amounts due to DASNY under the financing agreements will be supported by the statutory intercept mechanism of the program. Neither the DASNY bonds nor the school district's obligations under the financing agreements are secured by a lien on any facilities of the school districts or on any other property, and they may not be accelerated as a remedy for default. The bonds to be financed or refinanced with the proceeds of the DASNY school district revenue bonds will be identified in each financing agreement, and prior to the issuance of the school district revenue bonds, will each have been approved by the voters of the school districts and the Commissioner of Education. If there are any questions, Melissa and I are happy to respond.
Robert, thank you. Are there questions for David, Melissa, or Robert? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the school district's revenue bond financing proposal? May I have a motion, please, to approve the school district's revenue bond financing proposal?
Janice
So
McKay,
moved.
I so move.
Thank you, Janice. Was there a second?
Second.
I'm sorry, who was that, please?
John
Gardner.
Oh, hey, John, thank you very
I
much.
had trouble getting the mute button to work.
Which is a surprise, John. Normally you don't have those kinds of issues.
For me, that's a very substantial handicap. I have a feeling that Sarah rigged it that way.
All right, I wouldn't doubt that for a second.
Never.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded that we consider this financing proposal. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
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 Are there is there any opposition? Hearing none, are there abstentions? Hearing none, then the motion as presented Passes unanimously. The financing is approved. Thank you all. David, Melissa, and Robert, thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I think we got one more of these.
We have one more financing, again, another stellar credit and good client of ours. We have behind tab 5, Rockefeller University revenue bond transaction. The summary will be presented by Dave Ostrander, and Virginia Wong of Nixon Peabody is here to present the legal documents. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. President. The staff report provided to the members presents 2 series of tax exempt and or taxable, fixed and or variable rate bonds, in an amount not to exceed $90 million on behalf of the Rockefeller University. Bond proceeds from this issuance will be used to refund all or a portion of DASNY's Series 2012A and 2012B Rockefeller University bonds. This will be a current refunding for savings, with both series of bonds callable at par on or after July 1st of this year. Assuming current market conditions, a total net present value savings in the range of $15.7 million or 20.2% of the refunded bonds is expected from this refunding. The outstanding obligations of the university have been assigned a rating of AA1 from Moody's and AA from S&P. And with these investment grade ratings, Rockefeller meets the requirements under DASNY's financing guidelines for the bonds to be issued as a general unsecured obligation of the university. The university is a frequent DASNY borrower, issuing nearly $1.5 billion in bonds over the last 49 years. Rockefeller is a world-renowned center for research and graduate education in the biomedical sciences, with revenues derived primarily from investment income, fundraising, and government grants and contracts. Direct research funding from government sources has averaged $88.6 million annually over the last 5 years, with major government sponsors including the Department of Health and Human Services and the National Science Foundation. The university continues to focus considerable effort on increasing private support for its research programs. And since 2017, private gift and grant revenue has averaged $20.6 million annually. Overall, the university's financial resource base has grown, mainly due to those fundraising efforts and a history of positive investment returns. And as of June 30th, 2021, the university reported total net assets of over $3 billion. At this point, unless there's any questions, I will turn it over to Virginia to present the documents.
Thank you, David. Virginia, good to have you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for having me. I'm Virginia Wong from Nixon Peabody, and we're very pleased to be here on behalf of the good client and fine institution of Rockefeller University. Before you for your consideration is the adoption of 2 series resolutions authorizing individually and in the aggregate $90 million of DASNY's Rockefeller University revenue bonds, Series 2022. The authorized bonds are proposed to be issued under DASNY's Rockefeller University Revenue Bond Resolution adopted in 2001. And as David said, the proceeds are expected to be used to refund all or a portion of the university's 2012A and 2012B bonds. The authorized bonds are expected to be issued as tax-exempt fixed-rate bonds and to be sold by negotiated sale to B of A Securities as lead underwriter. The series resolutions do not limit the discretion of DASNY's officers to determine to issue the authorized bonds in other configurations than are currently contemplated. Each series resolution before you delegates to various officers of DASNY the power to make the determinations described in our letter and to do all things necessary or convenient with the sale and issuance of the authorized bonds. The authorized bonds will be special obligations of DASNY payable solely out of the revenues, which consist of payments made by the university under the loan agreement. Payment of authorized bonds is secured by the pledge and assignment made by the general resolution of the revenues and the monies and investments held in the funds and accounts established by the general resolution and the applicable series resolutions. DASNY and the university previously executed a loan agreement in 2001, which was amended and restated in April 2020. The loan agreement requires the university to make timely payment of debt service on the authorized bonds. As Dave mentioned, the university's obligations under the loan agreement are general unsecured obligations. The university will also enter into an agreement to provide continuing disclosure to facilitate the underwriter's securities law obligations. With that, that my presentation is finished, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have regarding this transaction.
Virginia, it's good to have you and thank you. Are there questions for David or for Virginia? Hearing none, may I have a motion to approve this transaction?
Yes, McKinney, I move.
Janice, thank you very much. Is there a second?
It's
I'll
Joan.
second, it's Beryl.
Beryl, thank you
You
for the
can.
second. It's been properly moved and seconded. We can take the vote. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Then the transaction is approved. It's approved unanimously. This is a very, very fine client, and we are extraordinarily pleased to be able to provide this service for the Rockefeller University. It's an amazing client. Thank you all very much for the work you've done on this. Mr. President, I think we go back to, no, I'm sorry. We are now at the corporate governance report. Mr. Johnson.
Well, hello, everybody, and good morning. First of all, just before we start this, I just appreciate every member of the board participating in the annual self-evaluation. We received that, and we will discuss that in executive session at the end of the overall board meeting, not at the end of this committee meeting, but at the end of the board meeting. The governance committee meeting did meet yesterday, and after adopting the minutes of the November 9th, 2021 meeting, we went through with Sarah Richards the annual review of existing policies involving the bylaws, the mission statement, and performance metrics, to which we have an amendment to that. So we'll talk about that separately. Code of ethical conduct, whistleblower, and the policy of payment of commission. There were no revisions to any of those except the performance metrics, and there is no board action required at this point. Now we'll go into we'll just discuss briefly the performance metrics. And Sarah, will you take us through that, please?
Sure. And just to summarize where we are with that, we had reviewed, as the members may recall, back in November, a number of governance documents that were before the committee at that time. And Ms. Sullivan had suggested that the metrics be revised to formally recite DASNY's policy of awarding 6% of contract value to service-disabled veteran-owned businesses. So after discussion, there is a provision that is reflected in those metrics. There is a copy included in the board materials, both a clean copy and a black line copy for review. Paul Koopman is here and able to answer any questions that the members may have on that, but it's basically one sentence that has been added to reflect DASNY's existing policy.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there questions for Sarah or for Paul about the amendment? Very brief, very slight amendment. Okay. Hearing none, does the proposed amendment, Sarah, have to be approved by the board?
Yes, yes, it does.
Yes.
Thank you. Then again, are there any questions? Hearing none. May I have please a motion to approve the very brief amendment that has been proposed?
So moved, Al.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Good to see you.
I've connected. I've gotten through we've worked through, and they broke me through the
firewall. You got through the firewall. It's good to have you. Is there a second, please, for the motion?
It's Joan, I second.
Thank you very much, Joan. And given that it was your proposal, it makes sense that you would. I appreciate it very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, then the motion is approved. It is approved unanimously, and the very slight amendment is adopted. Thank you very much, John.
I believe that that concludes the governance committee meeting report, and we'll resume discussing this in executive session, as I said before, at the end of the overall board meeting. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just make sure for the record, and I know you touched on this, but the full board does just need to review the bylaws as well. There's no resolution, but if we could just.
I didn't, Sarah, and I meant to. I overlooked it. The members have received the bylaws. I assume that there are no questions because I've not gotten any. Sarah, have you gotten any questions or comments on the bylaws?
I have not, and I don't think Governance Chair Johnson has either.
Thank you. John, I assume you haven't.
No, I thought I mentioned it. I'm sorry, but I believe that we did discuss it yesterday and at the point in the governance committee meeting, plus the extra people who were there, nobody had any changes proposed to it. So we just moved them on.
I think you did. I think you did say that actually, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean to suggest you didn't. I think you did.
Yeah, so it was mentioned at the governance committee. It's just the full board needs to review as well. For that one item, it was governance review and then full board review as well. So I just want to make sure that's on the record and clear.
So we can confirm in this meeting that the full board has reviewed them and there are no issues, no proposed changes, there's nothing to be revised.
And I believe from the perspective of the governance committee, the board has now fulfilled its obligations to review all the various policies, standards, codes, and issue whistles to everybody. So I think we're good for another 12 months.
Now.
John, thank you. I think you're right. Then we are moving on to tab 6, the President's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Several things today in my President's report will require resolutions, but first, I'm pleased to report that last month, kind of mid-month, we had our first in-person cabinet meeting up in Albany with our new governor, Governor Hochul. We also have seen a great decline in the number of positive COVID rates around the state of New York and the city of New York. The governor has reduced and lifted some mask mandates. We expect in New York City on Monday, the 7th, the mayor will lift the vaccine mandates for going to restaurants and such. As such, DASNY will be coming back to work full-time, full speed ahead on March the 7th. We'll continue to monitor the situation and make adjustments as necessary. It's our expectation that we'll have full strength back on March the 7th, and that will be a great day after 2 years plus of being out. Additionally, our April board meeting is scheduled to be in person. It'll be in the New York City office. Sarah sent that note out, but just to remind you, originally it was scheduled for Albany, but we've decided for technical reasons, quite frankly, that we're better off to do that in New York City when we come back. So that'll be a New York City meeting in April in person. So look forward to seeing all of you in 3D, as we like to say. That'll be a good day. Second, I want to just discuss, we'll talk a little bit later in Portia's report about the PIT transaction, but I want to highlight that we've worked closely with the Division of Budget on the financing team, and I'm very pleased to announce that as part of our PIT transaction that you approved last month, there will be a $500 to $600 million taxable series that will be led by 3 of our minority firms. Siebert will have the books. Luke and Ramirez will also be on the senior line, and all the other firms in that syndicate will be the minority firms, women-owned firms, or service-disabled veteran firms. So, great for the state to lead in having minority participation in our transactions, and it's something I'm very excited about. So I appreciate DOB's work with us on that. I appreciate our staff doing that. JP Morgan is leading the tax exempt transaction, and JP Morgan and Siebert have been working very closely together as we've done all the working group meetings and our market calls and all of those things. So a great transaction for DASNY. It will be signature. We should be featured in the bond buyer next week on this. So very great highlight for all of us.
It'll be featured in the bond buyer, Ruben?
Yes, our great communications director is getting us a article about the transaction.
Outstanding. That's outstanding.
So
congratulations, Ruben. That's a pretty extraordinary accomplishment, and it's wonderful to know that the governor and the Department of the Budget are thinking hard about how better to utilize some of the minority firms that we have had faith in for a number of years. Thank you very much for orchestrating that.
I think this year we get something we're very proud of personally. Moving on. So we've talked over the past probably 5 to 6 months now about our need to relocate our Buffalo office. As some of the new board members may not be aware, our Buffalo office currently is in an older home. And while we've patched it up over the years, it's come to the point where, from DASNY's perspective, it is ending its useful life. It needs significant repairs if we wanted to bring up the code for what we need. It is not ADA compliant. It doesn't have, it needs some roof repairs as well as some other structural issues. So Paul Koopman and our real estate team spent this last 3 to 4 months looking for an additional location in Buffalo. We have decided to move out closer to our biggest client in Buffalo, which is the University of Buffalo North Campus. And we will be leasing a space there, approximately $100,000 per year will be the lease amount there. It is a great location, again, closer to our Buffalo office from a client perspective, easy access in and out. And it saves us from $200,000 to $300,000 of investment in a building that really is not serving our function well. We do own that building. And so once we have made this move, assuming that we approve the lease today, once we make that move, we will be working with the state and doing a disposition of that building. The proceeds of the sale will come back to DASNY to be used for general purposes, and we'll put that back into offsetting some of the cost of moving into the new Buffalo office and have some money left over to pay for a couple of, probably 2 years of lease, assuming that that goes well from a sale perspective. So I need today, Mr. Chairman, approval of 2 resolutions. One is the draft lease, which you see behind tab 7, that would allow us to enter that lease and move forward. The second is the authorization to sell our current Buffalo office space. Again, once we get that authorization, we will then move forward. I see Mr. Johnson's hand, John Johnson. You're on mute, Mr.
No, I'm silent.
Oh, I saw your hand.
Thought you had a question, John. Well, thank you, Mr. President. Are there questions for Ruben? The draft lease, of course, is included in the materials. The authorization resolution is also included in the materials. We'll consider them separately. Let's do the lease first. Are there any questions about the lease? It's a 10-year lease with an acceleration provision after the 5th year. Is that right, Ruben?
Yes, sir. 5th year. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's right. All right. Are there any questions for Ruben about the lease? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the draft? Well, thank you, Janice. Thank you very much. Is there a second to approve?
There's
the
a
draft
second,
lease?
also from
All right.
Buffalo.
And I was trying to give it to John first. I was off, but I was like, let me let John have it. Sorry.
Once again,
But I so moved.
I expected that the two of you would actually do this, and I'm grateful to see that you did. It's been properly moved and seconded that the draft lease be approved. I assume if there are any major revisions that have to be made, that those revisions will come back to the board,
Yes,
even if in letter form, as opposed to waiting for the next meeting. Is that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Terrific. Are there any abstentions? Then the motion carries unanimously and the draft lease is approved. Thank you very much, Ruben. Thank you, Paul. The second matter to be considered by the full board is the authorization to sell the building that we, currently own. It's difficult to know a lot about that transaction, but the bylaws and operating procedures of DASNY require that we approve the sale. I assume, gentlemen, that you all will bring the contract of sale back to the board, or is this the board's final consideration?
No, so we will bring that back to you. Based on our bylaws, we have to have your approval to begin the sale process.
Right, right.
And so once we get this approved, we'll begin that process. But prior to finalizing the sale, we will report back to the board and get authorization for that. So, Paul and his team will go through the normal state disposition of property process.
Terrific. The disposition of property provisions of the bylaws will apply. Okay, fine. Are there any questions for Ruben or for Paul? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the authorization?
I make a motion to approve the authorization of the sale.
Janice, thank you very much. Is there a second, sir?
Second is raised by John, hand raised.
Did he raise his hand?
Second,
see
I
it.
raised the hand.
Doesn't come across on the screen, John.
All right.
It has been properly moved and seconded that staff undertake the sale of the property. May I, all in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions from the vote? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. Staff will proceed to sell the building.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, board. We appreciate that. And again, we look forward to moving into a place closer to our client. Appreciate everyone's support there. Next, as you know, on an annual basis, it is our obligation as a board and organization to approve an operating budget for next year. We reviewed this with you a couple of months ago. Kim Else will give a more fulsome report on the one minor, I guess relative whether it's minor or not, but one change that we have based on some insurance needs. Other than that, we're in the same place. However, I wanted to just highlight one thing that I think is important for us to recognize. We're asking for the adoption of an operating budget that includes about a $2.4 million operating deficit. During the pandemic, we also approved an operating deficit, and we made up some of that operating deficit with operations, but we also made up some of that operating deficit with a dip into some of the reserve funds. We will not be dipping into reserve funds this time to make up the deficit. We have basically three strategies that we are working on to address that. First is we have a couple of internal clients currently that we are working with, the Division of Budget and others, to see if we can increase our allocation to eat into that deficit. Second, we talked, I think 2 months ago, about our work with the Office of Cannabis Management. We do not have a memorandum of understanding yet with the Office of Cannabis Management, but we intend to enter into that sometime in the next couple of months. You'll see more on that. But that would add additional revenue to DASNY, assuming that moves forward. And then finally, and of course, the last thing we want to do, but finally, if necessary, we will make the appropriate expense cuts, including personnel expense cuts, to make sure that we end the year with a balanced budget. So instead of projecting those things in this budget, given the unknown nature of them, we're requesting authorization for this budget with the deficit in it, recognizing that we'll be working on these three strategies to make sure we end the year with a balanced budget. Before I turn over to Kim, any questions on that component of it?
Mr. President, we have a building we're going to sell for plus or minus $500,000. Will that have any impact on the budget for the fiscal year?
No, for better or for worse, because that is a capital as opposed to operating.
Yes.
We'll be transitioning the asset of the building into the asset of cash for the building. Now we can then apply those proceeds to other uses, and we will do that. But from an operating perspective, we're really trying to solve this budget issue with operations as opposed to one-time sales. But it will increase our cash balance.
And the projected lease amounts for the first 5 years, let's say, the first year, are included in the operating budget because we're not buying a new property, we're actually leasing.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay. Then I'm sorry for putting off your report, Kim, please.
That's good.
Have at it.
So Kim?
Thank you, Ruben. Included in your board book are updated budget materials reflecting a 22-23 proposed operating budget of $116,434,960. As noted in my memo, the updated materials reflect a slight revision to the projected results for the current year and the proposed budget presented at the January meeting based on updated information. Those changes include an increase to the health insurance based on updated projections, and revenue projections were updated to reflect the most recent data obtained from the state's budget process, resulting in a decrease in the projected deficits for this year and the 22-23 fiscal year. As Ruben mentioned, however, unlike previous years, if additional revenues can't be identified, we will be implementing measures to try to close that gap, which would include up to reduction in personnel expenses. For your consideration.
Kim, it's Al.
Yep.
Reduction in personnel expenses. What does that mean?
Reduction in employee expenses. So
You-
wages.
You mean wages? We
Yes.
actually either cut wages or there will be some degree of attrition.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes. For your consideration is a resolution to adopt the budget as presented. It anticipates 490 FTEs. As mentioned, the budget is for a total of 116,434,960, which represents a 1.2% increase from the 21-22 revised budget.
And Mr. Chairman, before you take action on this, I just want to thank Board Member Jaworski. Adrian's been a great advocate of ours and helped us go back and forth with DOB on the budget process. So I just want to recognize him specifically and thank him on the record for his good work and help and all the work the divisional budget does with us. You know, it's funny, they seem like family, so sometimes we take them for granted, but they really have been a great partner for us.
Thank you.
We don't get a lot of compliments, so I take them all.
No, thank you.
That's a real one.
Adrian, we recognize that you're being pulled in 20 different directions all at one time. We're very grateful for the time that you give to DASNY, and it's time that has real value. So thank you very much for that. Are there questions for Kimberly, for Adrian, for Paul, for Ruben? Then hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the proposed operating budget for 2022-2023?
I'll move, Al.
Thank you very, very much, Beryl. Is there a second, please?
I'll second. It's Joan.
Joan, thank you. It's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, the proposed operating budget is approved and it's approved unanimously. Thanks to everyone for helping, for whatever you did to contribute to getting this done. A lot of work. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, board members. You know, the next item related to our annual requirement is to approve our fee structure resolution. Mr. Chairman, there's not been a change in this fee structure, so it's fairly straightforward, but we do have to formally adopt this on an annual basis.
Okay, I'm just checking to make sure that I know where it is.
It is located behind tab 7 in my presentation.
But it's the second item behind tab 7. After the operating budget. Hold on, Mr. President, I just wanted to make sure that I've got it. Third, actually, it's the lease agreement.
Directly
Okay.
behind the resolution we just reviewed, Mr. Chair.
Got it. I've got it. Thank you. I overlooked it. Thank you very, very much. Are there any questions about the fee structure resolution for the staff? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve it?
I make a motion to approve.
Janice, thank you very much. Is there a second, please?
It's Joan. I second it.
Joan, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, then the motion carries unanimously and the fee structure resolution is approved as it appears. Mr. President.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to ask Kim Ellis to give her standard finance report on a monthly basis. Kim?
Thank you, Ruben. Don't have a whole lot to report on the standing financial report. There has been many changes since last month's meeting. We're still financing fees are 1.3 million. Through January, percentage of direct hours charged to public clients is at 95.2%. And our total operating expenses are slightly under projection by 100,000. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Questions? Hearing none. Mr. President?
Great, thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is to move to our public finance report. Portia?
Thank you, Mr. President. The members have the standard public finance reports in their materials, but first I wanted to update the board on the PIT financing, which was authorized last month. As you know, the board considered the PIT/sales tax authorization at the February meeting. This authorization was for an amount not to exceed $3 billion. We've been working on the financing, and DOB may wish to include additional project costs in this financing, approximately $200 million, which would bring this financing over the $3 billion not to exceed amount previously authorized. This is an unusual situation. These are costs that ESD typically finances. This is coming up now, given that our deal will close before the end of the fiscal year. We've discussed this with Nixon and Bryant Rubino, bond counsel, on this transaction. Bond counsel believes, and I will turn it over to them to explain this, that we have sufficient authorization to accommodate this and issue the currently expected $200 million more than the $3 billion. As you will recall, we received authorization in November for a PIT/sales tax financing in an amount not to exceed $3 billion. We issued $2.5 billion in bonds in December. As such, we have unused capacity in this previous authorization to accommodate the situation. The construct in our legal documents for PIT/sales tax is unique. The way our legal documents are written, they provide us with flexibility with regard to issuing one or more series at one or more times and for authorized purposes. While we provide you with a list of expected programs we expect to fund or reimburse, we can issue for any of the allowable programs. I will turn it over now to Chris and Sonny.
Thank you, Portia. I think you laid that out perfectly, and we'll follow up with the legal analysis. Just very quickly, following up on Mr. President's remarks on the working group and the structure on the underwriting side. It has been a very pleasant working group. Credit to your finance team and the banks involved. It's really been the working group calls have been great. So just thought folks might want to hear that. With respect to the legal analysis, the November authorization consisting of both the supplemental resolution that you guys adopted as well as the PACB resolution explicitly provides for multiple issuances of bonds in one or more series or sub-series and at one or more times. Likewise, the ensuing February authorization, again, consisting of both the supplemental resolution and PACB resolution, also explicitly provide for multiple issuances of bonds in one or more series or sub-series and at one or more times. Moreover, that February authorization does not contain anything in either your supplemental resolution or the PACB resolution undermining, superseding, or otherwise impacting the November authorization. I'm going to turn it over to Sonny to talk about authorized purposes a little bit.
Chris, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning again, everyone. Just to briefly add to the points that Chris just made, as is customary for these programs and as described in our board letters, the supplemental and PACB resolutions both contain the expected use of bond proceeds, but both resolutions also explicitly provide for the issuance of bonds for any authorized purpose, which allows for a great deal of flexibility. So, taken all together as a legal matter, given the express provisions of the November authorization and February authorization, it's our collective view that DASNY retains the authorization to issue bonds up to the unused portion of the November authorization for any authorized purpose and without any further action by the board or PACB. We'll turn it back to either Portia or Ruben, but we're happy to answer any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
If Portia or Ruben have any additional comments, then let's hear them. And then if the members have questions for Chris, Sonny, Portia, or Ruben, then please offer them up.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to highlight this is a unique scenario. It's not something that we intend from a precedent perspective to be setting. I also want to highlight that the authorization and the flexibility provided to the Division of Budget and the state for the Pitt and sales tax credit is not extended to our private clients.
Right.
So from our perspective, this is an accommodation for our best client, our biggest client anyway, but our best client.
One of our best clients.
We said about Rockefeller and New School today already.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But in all seriousness, it is important. The division budget is trying to get something complete between now and the end of fiscal year. I'm happy we were able to accommodate them. But again, this is a unique scenario, not something we expect to do on a consistent basis in any form or fashion. I also want to thank Chris and Sonny for their expert legal work and advice and counsel on this. So I appreciate that as well. Portia, do you have anything else you need to say before we ask for questions?
Nothing more from me. Thank you.
Great.
Are there questions for these four good folk?
So it's basically a one-off, Ruben?
Yes, again, Mr. Romsky, this is something that occurred really because of timing. These projects would have typically done.
Yeah, Jerry is, Mr. is not necessary.
Okay, Mr. Romsky. Yeah, so this is a one-off. This is not something we're not trying to set a precedent here or go in different methodologies. We're really accommodating some projects that would have typically been financed in the ESD component of the Pitt and sales tax strategy, but because we're year end, we'll close this before the fiscal year. They want to get these projects, financed and execute a long-term financing for projects that capital has been spent already in this fiscal year. So that's why this is being done now. So yeah, this is our report. So.
And also, I think if we look at the overall financial environment with rising interest rates, and again, the need for our clients to work quickly, I think keeping in mind it's a one-off and an exceptional situation, I think it's the right move to make.
Thank you, Bill.
I think everybody agrees. I've had fairly extensive conversations with Ruben and with Portia, and Ruben has made a point that I have tried to make clear, and that is that this is an exceptional situation. And it, from my perspective, one man, one vote, has no precedential value. That DASNY has not done this before in this manner, that we are up against it with regard to a PACB approval time. And we do have, and I think the legal opinion that I have heard, I've had the opportunity to read 2 pages of legal opinion. Chris and Sonny, thank you very much. The clarity is extraordinary, and I appreciate it. Although the question presented, first paragraph of your memorandum, is the longest damn sentence I think I've ever read.
Our pleasure, Mr. Chairman.
I love it when people clearly know the language and use the language that way. It's important that the record reflect that this is an exceptional situation, and that but for the fact that you all have made it clear that we have authorization to do it. There's no legal issue here from where I sit at all. We're going to do it, and we're happy to do it for our largest client. That said, I want to make sure that the board at least hears that it is exceptional, and this is not something we would expect to do again, unless we come up with another exceptional situation. The end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If no other questions, Portia.
I just want to make a point. The end of year and the need to use this money, I think that may not be necessarily exceptional. It could set a precedent. Next year, we could have the same situation. But I think Beryl's point is what's compelling to me with the interest rates rising. I think that that is an exceptional situation in combination with end of year. So that's really what has sold me on this. I just want to, for the record, state that.
Thank you, Joan.
And Joan, I appreciate that. Let me say something in response. I'm a purist about these kinds of matters. I believe that you approve financing, you put headspace in that financing for a reason, but it has to do with that financing. The notion of bootstrapping one financing with another financing is not a precedent I'd like to see DASNY set. We're doing it for all the right reasons, and there is no question about the legality of it. But it, in my view, is something that needs to be exceptional. And Beryl has made that point. She's done it in the context of a rising interest rate environment. I get it. It makes sense. But we also have an approval process here that we don't have to go through again because of the way we're doing this. I'm fine with that. It makes sense. But I want the record to reflect clearly that there is at least the view that this is an exceptional, as Ruben has pointed out, an exceptional situation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate it. And again, for informational purposes, and thanks again, Chris and Sonny, for jumping on this morning to help us clarify that. Portia, you want to finish your report, please?
Just wanted to update the board that we placed the Oceanside Library financing 2 weeks ago, and we are closing that transaction tomorrow.
And thank you for Portia, actually, for bringing this to everybody's attention. I know it sort of was, a last minute thing. So thank you, Portia.
Market update. Total year-to-date new issue volume for 2022 is approximately 48.7 billion, down about 25% from this time last year. Total supply for the week is expected to be about $7 billion. Tax bond yields were lower yesterday, with the 10-year AAA MMD and 30-year MMD both decreasing by 5 basis points to 1.53 and 1.93 respectively. U.S. government bond yields were lower yesterday as the 10-year Treasury yield decreased by 11 basis points to 1.72, and the 30-year Treasury yield decreased by 6 basis points to a 2.11. Flight to quality there, given the issues that are happening with Ukraine and Russia. Municipal bond funds reported outflows for the week ending February 23rd, after reporting outflows the previous week as well. Since the February 2nd board meeting, the 1-year MMD has increased by 17 basis points, the 10-year by 3 basis points, and the 30-year by 2 basis points. In that same time period, the 10-year Treasury yield has decreased by 9 basis points, and the 30-year by 1 basis point. There are a couple of other things I wanted to update the board on. One is the Raise the Age program. Raise the Age is a juvenile justice reform initiative that was included in the fiscal 2018 budget. It removes 16 and 17-year-old offenders from the adult criminal justice system. Raise the Age requires that young offenders, these young offenders, 16 and 17-year-olds, be placed in age-appropriate settings so that they can receive services to lower the risk of reoffending. DASNY is authorized to provide financing and construction services in connection with these age-appropriate settings. We are working with OCFS, and we will keep you apprised of our progress. I also wanted to update you on some rating changes. S&P upgraded NYU Langone hospitals to A+ from A. They cited the hospital's improved balance sheet and cash flows, their solid debt service coverage, the young age of their facilities, and increasing geographic coverage. Moody's downgraded Catholic Health System of Western New York to B1 from Ba2. As you will recall, I updated the board in October regarding the Moody's downgrade at that time to Ba2 from Baa2. At that time, they cited declining liquidity, the nurses' strike, and the effects of the pandemic. Moody's took this most recent rating action in connection with an upcoming $60 to $65 million new money financing. It should be noted that in this rating action, they did also cite Catholic Health System's essential market position. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for Portia? Hearing none, I think we've already had the report behind tab 9, which is Kimberly's report, which means that we can go on to the construction report. Steve.
Mr. Chairman, before we do that, if I would, just
Yes.
a point of presidential privilege today. We lost one of our great underwriters this past weekend. Don O'Brien of Raymond James, their lead underwriter, passed away of a sudden and difficult illness. Don was the lead underwriter on several of our school pool financing transactions. He also was one of Matt and my kind of backdoor market information knowledge-based gentlemen in the business for 40 some odd years, passed away at 66. And so we will remember him generally, but I wanted to put on the record today that DASNY is very thankful for the work that he did, and he will be missed.
Was he a former colleague, a direct colleague of yours?
He was. I worked together with him for 4 years at Raymond James. So he's also a
That's
good friend of mine.
outstanding. Thank you. Thank you for getting it in the record. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for the Raymond James loss.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
With that, Steve.
Good morning. Thank you. The construction division report as follows. I'm going to start with the Javits Center. After months of collaboration with the Convention Center Operating Corporation, the Convention Center Development Corporation, FDNY consultants and contractors, DASNY issued a conditional temporary approval of occupancy last Friday, February 25th, for the merged South Expansion and Transformer Building project. All documentation required was received late last week, leading up to the TAO. Conditions of the TAO expire at the end of April 22. The conditional TAO now allows the Javits Center events to utilize both the South, which is the existing space, and the expansion space concurrently without barriers to entry of either space in place. The team will now work on the items and issues associated with the conditions, ultimately leading hopefully to a code compliance certificate in the near future. On the GOZER program, we continue to meet regularly, both internally and with DASNY project management staff, and with GOZER, of course, as we are now less than 7 months away from the program completion end date deadline, with all projects requiring to be closed by September of 2022. We have 23 active projects concurrently right now. And of the 23, DASNY's involved fairly heavily on the management side in about a half a dozen of those projects, which are challenging for a number of reasons. So more to come in September. We are pushing through issues on projects, including material shortages, long lead items, increasing cost and labor force reduction issues. So, the perfect storm trying to get these projects finished up by September. On the DOH lab side, we did receive approval from New York State AG's office with regard to our reprogramming efforts to align the project with the $750 million budgeted appropriation. We're now seeking approval from the controller's office to begin that reprogramming effort with the design build team. On the SUNY front, construction is progressing at Smith Hall out at SUNY Cortland. This is the second of 2 towers. The first tower, Casey Hall, was completed about a year ago. We have a deadline for this project of July of this year. I'll actually be on site next week visiting the project and our construction manager. And Awasting Hall and Colonial Quad at New Paltz and New Albany both will be starting in May of this year. We're up to 15 summer projects for the SUNY program with a total value of approximately $18 million. On the OMH side, project activity continues robustly across many of the OMH campuses at this time. The designer of record continues with the 30% schematic documents for the $406 million Mid-Hudson Psychiatric Center project. The $140 million Central New York Psych Center rehab project is now in construction, full force. Again, I'll be out there next week visiting that project. And our $40 million Western New York Children's Psychiatric Center upgrade project has been advertised for bid with a bid opening date of March 24th planned. Just a couple of other items. Want to again thank Nadine for all her work associated with the vaccine mandate. This is the mandate directed at our mental hygiene customer agencies, whereby DASNY staff, as well as our consultant, subconsultant, contracting and subcontracting staff all must be vaccinated, dating back to January 27th. We have extended the deadline for declarations, which advise us that those groups working on our projects are compliant with the mandate to this Friday, March 4th. On the PM Web implementation update front, we have now about 55 projects in the system. We're adding projects every week. We're moving close to the completion of phase 1, which we anticipate mid-year this year. We have begun to talk about the phase 2 implementation and what that may entail. That'll probably get moving in early 2023. Staffing challenges just continue as usual. I've updated you regularly on the issues here. We're up to 20 recruitments right now in the construction division, mostly targeted.
Did you say, I'm sorry, Steve, you said 20?
Yes, sir, 20.
Good God. All right, thank you.
Targeted at our code compliance group, our project management group, our design group, and our procurement group. And lastly, I did deliver a number of presentations, one to the American Council for Engineering Companies on January 31st, second to the SUNY Physical Plant Administrators Association on February 16th. And last week I was in the city for the New York City Professional Women in Construction panel on the future of higher education. That was on February 24th. That concludes my report.
Mr. Carroll, thank you very much. Are there questions for Steve? Then this is probably some violation of law, a combination of church and state. But Steve, thank you for your willingness to display your commitment to your faith. Don't see that very much anymore, and it's very gratifying. Thank you. If there are no further questions, then we go to Nadine.
Thank you, Board Chair. So the purpose of my report is to provide the board with an update regarding current DASNY legislative proposals that are included in the 2022-2023 executive budget. We currently have 8 pending legislative proposals that, if passed, would expand DASNY's authority to provide finance, design, and construction services to additional entities, which include nonprofits and municipalities that are beyond our current statutorily authorized list of clients. Several of these proposals would allow entities that may lack the ability to manage large-scale projects and are expected to receive state funding in some manner from a larger scale state initiative. They would be able to take advantage of DASNY's construction management expertise. The first of those proposals is the Brownfield Opportunity Area Expansion Bill. This bill would authorize DASNY to provide planning, design, and construction services to support the Brownfield Opportunity Area Grant recipients. The program supports economically distressed and environmental justice areas and would further support the goals of the state's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, also known as CLCPA. These communities would be allowed to seek DASNY services to support local revitalization and to support climate protection efforts. We are also seeking to expand DASNY's authority to provide construction services, construction management services to local and downtown communities that have been selected to receive grants from the state's Downtown Revitalization Initiative. This initiative also provides funding to local municipalities to transform downtown neighborhoods, to provide business development, job creation, and economic and housing diversity. Next, we also have a proposal which will support our work with OASIS. The proposal will expedite the development of capital projects to support voluntary operated addiction services programs. The bill would allow the state to purchase for development into voluntary operated addiction services facilities, and they'll be allowed to use DASNY's construction management services to accelerate the development of new facilities. We would work on doing the retrofitting, fit out, whatever is required to stand up these new facilities. Furthermore, we also have a proposal which will allow us to assist our fellow public authorities, those authorities that are not typically experienced in conducting, providing constructions. They're not regular builders. So we would give them the option to utilize DASNY to provide those construction management services. To assist the construction portfolio, we've also advanced a bill that seeks to expand New York's pre-qualification program to include DASNY. Currently, the city of New York has a pre-qualification program, which we would like to also duplicate, and so that it would create efficiencies for our construction team and translate into significant savings for the management of DASNY's numerous construction projects. I think Steve will attest, we have approximately 600 current construction projects. So anything that we could do to expedite that process and move the projects forward would greatly benefit the portfolio. Another proposal that would benefit both the construction and the public finance portfolio is what we've identified as our general authorization. What this proposal would do would allow DASNY to provide finance, design, and construction services to any nonprofit organization for capital infrastructure projects that are not less than $5 million. Typically, when DASNY is providing services to these entities, we have to get individual statutory authorization for each entity that's seeking to provide, to obtain DASNY services. With this legislation, we'd be able to provide these services to any nonprofit that comes to DASNY to seek either financing or construction services. The nonprofits would still need to demonstrate sufficient credit worthiness in order to secure funding in the public and or private markets, but they would have the opportunity and the option. It would not be a mandate, but an option to secure DASNY services. Another significant proposal is the legislation to authorize the creation of the Cannabis Social Equity, either a private debt or equity fund, to provide financial assistance to social and economically disadvantaged licensees, to create retail cannabis dispensaries. DASNY would be authorized to provide the planning, design, procurement, and construction services for these licensees. The bill also allows DASNY to create one or more subsidiaries to provide services to the Office of Cannabis Management, the Cannabis Control Board, and the newly created Social Equity Fund.
The fund, sure.
We also have two very important extenders. The one is the extender of DASNY's design build authorization. That bill also includes several different state and public authorities that have received design build authorization. So it would encompass those entities as well, but the extension is for an additional 5 years to December 31st, 2027. Our second extender is DASNY's authorization to create subsidiaries. It's another important extender for those entities that we take title to the property of borrowers regulated under Public Health Law, Article 28, who've defaulted under DASNY loan agreements and mortgages. So we're seeking a 3-year extension on that bill as well to July 1st, 2025. The authorization has been renewed 5 times since 2011. So we're hoping and anticipate that we would successfully get that extension again. And the last significant proposal that's included in the budget is a statewide healthcare facility transformation program, number 4. DASNY's gone 1 through 3. This 4th proposal would establish a new $1.6 billion program to fund capital projects for eligible healthcare providers, building out ambulatory care infrastructure, financial information technology, telehealth improvements, and strengthening the quality of healthcare services in communities following the impact of the coronavirus public health emergency. A portion of the program would also be used to fund eligible capital projects that were submitted under statewide 3. Thus far, we've had several meetings with legislative staff. We've walked them through these proposals. We've addressed any questions that they might have to obtain their support. At this time, we can't tell whether they are supportive or have rejected any of our proposals, but both houses are expected to provide their one-house bills, budget proposals, either at the end of this week or next week. And at that time, once we receive those one-house proposals, we'll be able to determine whether they either accept, reject, or will modify any of the executive proposals in their one-house bills. Hopefully and ideally, we will hope that the houses will accept all of DASNY's related proposals in their One House bills. But even if they're not included, we will continue to negotiate in earnest until the budget is due to be passed April 1st, which hopefully if we get an on-time budget, April 1st is the anticipated date as to when we will have an idea of what proposals have passed and have gone through or not. And then I'll be able to update the board at our April 6th meeting, again, if the budget passes by that time, on what proposals have been successful. And that concludes my presentation regarding our current legislative proposals. If anyone has any questions?
Are there questions for Nadine? I don't know that I have any questions, Nadine. I have comments. You've just covered an enormous amount of work, an enormous amount of work. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at your outline, but and you do it well, which means it happens quickly. And I don't know what I've missed. It would be great. It would be great to have you, the April meeting, the May meeting, literally go through it at half speed, cherry pick the projects and tell this board about them. I was on the board of a halfway house uptown in Manhattan for almost 10 years. It was OASAS funded. You have here the OASAS capital program reform effort. It would expand access to addiction services. Well, of course, everybody wants to do that. How does DASNY get, I'm not asking now, but what specifically would DASNY do to help to expand those addiction services? That nexus between mental health and criminality in New York particularly is extraordinary. And OASAS is, in my view, has been underfunded in its efforts for at least the 10 years that I know about. It would be great to hear what DASNY would propose to do, or what's being proposed that DASNY do. The other one is the Cannabis Social Equity Fund. I'm of two minds on cannabis social equity. I believe on the one hand that disadvantaged folk ought to have an opportunity to get in the game. That makes sense to me. It makes serious sense to me. On the other hand, I don't know how I feel yet about DASNY getting into the game. Do we issue for disadvantaged but qualifying cannabis dispensary owners? I don't know the answer to that. I would love to have you spend a little bit of time, take a piece of a meeting and just do a presentation, or have people on your staff do a presentation so you can evaluate how good a job they're doing. but it would be great to have you cherry pick a few of these things and present them to us, assuming that the other members on this call, on TV, are interested in it. I am, and if they're not, then you and I already have an appointment to talk about the cannabis legislation. I've got 100 questions about that now that I've gone through some of it, and you can put me in a room with 5 of your people and point to them and have them answer my questions. But you've just covered a huge volume of plans, of legislative plans proposals. It'd be great to hear you sort of dig down into a couple of them and see where how you feel about it.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, if I might just interject very quickly here, because you brought up 2, I think, important highlighted topics. John Gardner, probably 6 months, 8 months into my tenure, highlighted to me that the way DASNY really grows is not by trying to market to expanding our current programs, really work with the legislature to expand our legislative authority. And so you see in this context that we're doing a lot of that work. On the OASAS, for instance, I sat with the commissioner who heads that organization the other evening, and she said she's being pushed to increase the physical facilities so people can access those. And we'll be relying on DASNY to assist her with the location build out of those facilities. Likewise, on the Office of Cannabis Management, the office has specific initiatives they're working for to help people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds build out their facilities. And so DASNY's role in that is also a build out, location build out facilities type role. So again, taking the core expertise of DASNY and helping other agencies and authorities implement their programs, I think is a great way for us to expand our business generally. And so I think when you look at the multiple things that Nadine did go over, and it was a lot, and a lot behind it.
I mean, it was a huge volume of material, and you covered it. You gave us enough of it so that we had some sense of the importance of it. But I can't imagine. I mean, your staff isn't big enough. You need more people. You need legislative people. You must have them. I don't know who they are, but at some point, I'd love to have you bring them into a meeting and introduce us to those people so we know.
Al, do we have our own lobbying staff?
Well, it's a Reuben question. I'm sure that we have people who point us in the right direction for lobbying. Do we hire lobbyists?
We do have a director, a legislative director, but in my prior position, I was involved in the successful negotiation of at least 6 executive budgets. So I do have a lot of on-time budgets as well. And I think working very closely with Mr. Swazerski for several of those. Yeah.
Everything comes back to Adrian.
Exactly. But no, and I don't do it alone. We definitely, Michael Hernandez is our legislative director. The legal team works on each of these proposals, and we work very closely with Portia's team and Steve's team. It's not done in a vacuum because we want to make sure, that we're advancing proposals that'll benefit DASNY as a whole and increase our bottom line. And while we're also trying to advance programs that promote the public good. The OASIS program is going to expand the number of facilities that can address the opioid crisis. So they want to increase the number of voluntary facilities that the voluntary agencies have, so that they are, we can address this crisis that's ever growing. And in light of the fact that there are settlements that are coming in connection with the pending opioid litigation, that's something that might be able to tap into as well.
And I don't purport to speak for Joan, but maybe I am. We both, represent different parts of the legislative, and if we can be of any assistance.
Oh, appreciate it. Yes.
We're always available, and if whatever we can do to assist, just reach out.
Definitely. I appreciate that.
It's a confounding, I've been a lobbyist. It is a confounding way to earn a living, I can tell you that. but it's getting direction from 3 or 4 or 10 different parts of an organization as to what it is that they need. Those parts, in our case, the major staff positions. What do you need for us to do to enhance your bottom line, but also to get done for DASNY what makes DASNY shine? I mean, what are those things? You may not have enough time to sit down and talk to me about all this, but I would love to have a conversation with you about, because I know that you do have, a legislative history, your own personal legislative history. It'd be fun to talk about that a little bit. Mr. President, if you would allow me to do that with the General Counsel, and her staff, those who are part of this. The OASAS matter has loomed large in my life. I've spent a lot of my own money filling in the holes that OASAS's budget would not permit it to fill in that institution that I was a part of for 10 years. And you just wonder, as people flee New York, as the tax base erodes, you wonder how organizations like that are going to continue to provide the extraordinarily essential services that they provide. It's huge. All right, I'm sorry. I can go off on a tangent. I can do that. But thank you very much for an excellent report. And now we're going to end.
I think
we're going to go in. Sure.
Mr. Gardner can't resist making one comment. We've had two successive discussions, one about the budget and one about the additional responsibilities that the legislature is going to add to DASNY, which I think is all very encouraging. The obvious combination of those two discussions is you can't add to our responsibilities when we're shrinking a budget. The responsibilities come with a cost. Doing them the way that DASNY would want to, will do them and wants to do them comes with a cost. And when I made my comment about the way that DASNY grows, as its legislative mandate is increased, its funding has also increased. So I'll leave it at that.
John, I think it's an important point because all of these mandates will be funded mandates as opposed to unfunded mandates. And they will help us not just bridge that gap, but also just expand our top line and allow us to deploy our personnel we have currently more efficiently on projects, but also to add to DASNY staff experts who will benefit that. But yeah, all of these would be funded mandates. And so we're looking forward to expanding our presence that way. So appreciate your comments. And I do appreciate the advice so many years ago when we first had the conversation, because it changed my focus on kind of where we can grow as DASNY and what could benefit for the organization going forward. So I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
So we've got an hour and a half plus, so we've got 105 minutes into the meeting. We have to have an executive session. I think we do that now. Is that appropriate?
Yes, sir.
Then may I have a motion, please, to go into executive session to discuss all.
Excuse me a minute, before you get that far, do we have to have meetings of the Atlantic Avenue and the North General boards too today?
Sarah,
No,
do we do that first?
Those are next month. Though we
Next
do
month.
and it'll be the annual meeting for both of those subsidiaries.
But I just didn't want to get off.
I thought that was.
Have to come back and do that.
All right, so may I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss all the stuff that one needs to discuss in executive session, financial histories, particular corporations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. May I have that motion?
Make the motion, it's Joan.
Thank you, Joan. Second?
I'll second it, Farrell.
Farrell, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. We're going into executive session. This is to let the staff know that before we leave, before we go into executive session, that when we come back to the meeting, the only thing we're going to do is to adjourn. So there will be no decisions made in the executive session, and we're not going to look to make any decisions after the executive session. So you guys can actually go off and earn your money today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, board members. We appreciate it. Have a good executive session. Sarah and Deb will lead you in and out of that.
Thank you, sir.